Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We move our attention next to... I think this is a really, really, really scary moment in British politics. But I appreciate that if you voted to leave the European Union, you probably don't. And I don't know whether or not we can have the conversation I want to have as a result of that. Because that caller that we took a while ago, I'm sorry to bang on about it. I bet he wishes he'd never rung in. And I'm pretty sure his name was Steve, although I might start giving him a false name. Someone called him Duff the other day. When Steve phoned up, and I was trying to get a topic up and running, hovering around the issue of why, when Donald Trump lies, you cheer. And you know that he's lying. But I didn't think anyone would ring in to admit it. Yeah, I know that he's lying, but I love it. Because then my question is, why do you love it? And the answer was, and always will be, because it annoys people like you. And there is the secret, if you're struggling to unravel, of so-called alt-right politics and politicking. If you can persuade people that you're on the same side, then you can get away with murder. And the same side of what is a question to which I don't yet have a full and comprehensive answer. The same side of what? As a general rule, it would be something that could be loosely filed under political correctness or racism. People who are portrayed as spending far too much time worrying about equality and fairness and racism or what have you. Or people who are portrayed as not being outraged by criminal acts or violence when it's committed by people who weren't born here. I've never met anyone like that. I don't think I've ever met anyone who would say, I'd rather be punched in the face by an immigrant than by an indigenous person. Or equally, I probably have met a few people who'd say I'd rather be punched in the face by an indigenous person than an immigrant, actually. And there's the problem, is that one side is furiously committed to this so-called culture war, and the other side doesn't know what the culture war is supposed to be about. And that, it seems to me, not only explains Donald Trump's famous observation about being able to shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote, but it perhaps, and I hope it doesn't, and I'm more than happy to put my hands up in the air and say that I'm as much in danger on days like today as hearing what I want to hear, seeing what I want to see, as anybody else is. But I think that entrenchment is now so deep that behaviour which would have done for any politician, let alone a Prime Minister, may not do for Boris Johnson. So what would I cite by way of precedent? Probably Cecil Parkinson to start with, actually, who within living memory saw his political career and very much tipped as a future Prime Minister, one of Margaret Thatcher's favourites, finished after it emerged that he had had a child with his then secretary. There's a subtext to that story, subsequent chapters to that story that are even more arresting, but bottom line, he had an affair, she had a baby, his career was over. Boris Johnson's already done that. And he did it before he got into Downing Street. Had a child outside wedlock that I'm allowed to tell you about. Okay? So now we're looking at a story that brings money into the equation, which is usually the point at which hypocritical right-wingers wake up. Oh, who cares? Who cares where he slings his hook? Who cares where he sows his oats? As long as he's on the straight and narrow finance. Well, here's a story which needs answering. These are all in the realms of reports and allegations. But a 34-year-old former model was given £26,500 in grants for her firm and access to 3 overseas trade missions led by Boris Johnson while he was mayor of London.
Well, in the last half hour, Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, asked Mr Johnson about his conduct in public office with reference to his alleged links with the US tech entrepreneur Jennifer Arcuri.
The Prime Minister also has questions to answer about his conduct in public office. And in particular, allegations that he failed to declare an interest in the allocation of public money to a close friend whilst he was Mayor of London. It was announced today that the Department of Culture, Media and Sport is reviewing the funds allocated in the light of the Sunday Times report. Did the Prime Minister initiate that review? Will the Prime Minister fully cooperate with the DCMS review and that of the Greater London Assembly? Will he refer himself to the Cabinet Secretary for investigation? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, no Prime Minister, is not above the law.
Oh, and I am very proud, by the way, to take his next point, about everything that I did as Mayor of London. I may say to the current Mayor that he'd be better off spending less on press officers and more on police officers in London, because we were funding 20,000 more on our streets.
Well, Mr Johnson has insisted that everything was done entirely in the proper way, while the Culture Department says it's investigating a grant worth £100,000 to one of Ms Arcuri's companies. So what do we know so far? Our political correspondent Paul McNamara has more.
Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Arcuri and I am the co-founder and CEO of Hacker House.
Hacker House, a firm of ethical hackers that received a government grant of £100,000. But what MPs want to know is whether there's a conflict of interest between the nature of the relationship between the firm's CEO and Boris Johnson and the allocation of public funds. As soon as Parliament reopened today, they queued up to ask the government department with their hands on the purse strings.
I care very little about the personal life of the Prime Minister, but I care a lot about how this government manages conflicts of interest and how it spends taxpayers' money.
This is fundamentally a question of character and of suitability. Is the Prime Minister of sufficient character to occupy high office and disperse public funds?
Will the Minister reassure the House that there will be no other examples of friends with benefits funding from DCMS or any other department?
Awkward questions, and today the Digital Minister confirmed the grant was being reviewed.
We are, of course, aware of the claims raised recently by the Sunday Times, and the department is reviewing the decision that was taken, but we monitor all initiatives that have been...
And there were further questions as to whether the firm should have even been eligible for UK government money, as most of the staff and business appear to be based in America.
This is a company that is based in Britain as far as Companies House is concerned. It is a company with a British phone number. We will review that, but we have no reason to think... We have no reason to think that there is anything untoward in this particular matter.
That issue of the UK number was seized upon by Tom Watson. He said that when members of his team tried to call it, it went through to America.
Thank you for calling Hacker House. Please note this call
sounds like an American voice. In fact, when we called them earlier on, after that pre-recorded message, we got through to someone from the firm, and they confirmed they're in California. They told us they had offices in the US and the UK, but didn't provide further details. Questions of conflict of interest first arose when the Sunday Times revealed another tech firm Ms Arcuri ran received grants from a London mayoral organisation while Boris Johnson was mayor, and had joined trade missions abroad.
Well, we know that she was on 3 trips, but there was a trip to the Far East in November 2014, when the mayor was specifically asked a question to name all the Delhi members of the delegate, and he gave names of all the members of the delegation apart from one name. The name he missed out was of Jennifer Arcuri. And it's interesting why he missed the name out. Was it just sort of forgetfulness? Was there anything else behind it? We want to give him the opportunity of answering those sort of questions.
The Greater London Assembly Oversight Committee have asked Mr Johnson to provide details of any relationship. Both the Prime Minister and Miss Arcuri insist there is no impropriety.
He forged a close friendship with her when she was in her 20s, and reportedly, and he's free to deny this, although the story was told to the Sunday Times by her former landlord, he reportedly visited her East London flat regularly. He agreed, it is a matter of record I think, to appear as a guest speaker at 4 of her tech events, and overturned a decision to refuse her a place on a trade trip to New York, the Sunday Times claimed. Now, I think that if this was a politician you don't like, then you would be outraged. Just, I mean, imagine for a moment, to go back to old Steve, who said, I know he's lying, but I love it because it winds up people like you and Sadiq Khan, James. And I thanked him for his honesty. I still do. I hope he's coming out of that hole, but I don't know. I know that Boris Johnson has reportedly done things that would end most political careers, but I don't mind because it really upsets people like you, James. The thing is, it doesn't. Not in the way that perhaps you think it might. The only thing that upsets me is the erosion of general standardised principles in public life. You know? The idea that if it was... This is one of the problems with pursuing my very careful policy of hardly ever meeting any politicians in case I like them and then feel somehow restricted when trying to give them a kicking live on the radio. I quite like Rory Stewart at the moment. Sue me, all right? If it turned out that Rory Stewart had, while on government duty, been instrumental in the decision to overturn departmental decisions not to allow a certain individual onto trade trips, in his case, he used to say he was doing international trade, wasn't he, when he resigned? So, you know, someone had been turned down from joining him on a trip to Ghana, and then lo and behold, after a personal intervention from the Minister for International Trade, that person was allowed on the trip. And then it turned out that he was popping around to her flat for a little bit of discussion. 12 after 12. I mean, I mean, you can say you don't care, or it doesn't matter, but then it doesn't matter when anybody does it. And you can say that as well. But this story, it seems to me, is really, really big. Not just because of what it tells us. In many ways, some could argue that we already knew, in principle, if not in detail, in practice, but because of what it shows us about what we're becoming, okay? So you've already got one of Boris Johnson's big backers publicly calling for the government to break the law. People who are heavily invested in the pound tanking after a so-called no-deal Brexit. You've already got a cessation of the rule, or an attack upon the rule of law coming from sources either in or very close to Downing Street. So that phrase, all bets are off, normal service will not be resumed. Now we can look at it through the lens of a very traditional story. And this is classic News of the World territory, if it was a soap star or a footballer. But given that it's a prime minister, it gets promoted to the front page of the Sunday Times. And the story has been put to the prime minister, and the prime minister has declined to answer any questions. Now, I'm keen to talk to you if you would be up in arms about Sadiq Khan being caught conducting himself like this while in office, or Philip Hammond being caught conducting himself like this while in office, or Jeremy Corbyn being caught conducting himself like this while in office, and you take your pick, you know, and then ask yourself why you're not up in arms about Boris Johnson doing it. Because and I don't know if anyone's going to ring me on this, but I'm trying my best to get the question as clear as it needs to be. You are playing with fire if you are now basing your position upon perceived tribal loyalties as opposed to objective and universally agreed standards of behaviour in public life. You know what Trump's been done for now? 8 separate occasions in the course of one phone call trying to get the president of Ukraine to launch an investigation into Joe Biden's son. And the contention in America at the moment is that he threatened to withdraw aid if Ukraine didn't launch an investigation into his political opponent's family. Right? That's what happens when you turn off your moral compass because you think this bloke's on your side when it comes to what? For Trump, it's just being vile about Mexican people and migrants in general, and that means he's your man. What is it for Johnson? It's a weird one now. So Brexit, obviously, but as you know, he didn't believe in Brexit, as David Cameron confirmed in his memoirs. He only did it because he thought they'd lose. Is that what you've been reduced to now? Cheering for a man who thinks you're stupid? Or am I missing something? And if this was Philip Hammond or Rory Stewart or Sadiq Khan or Jeremy Corbyn or Joe Swinson or John McDonnell or whoever it may be, then your reaction would be identical. I hope mine would be. I think mine would be. I can't prove that mine would be. But if you know yours wouldn't be, what the hell is going on? 0345 606 0973. The Prime Minister is facing calls to come clean about his relationship with an American entrepreneur who received public money when he was Mayor of London. Forget the names. Describe the office. The Prime Minister. Come on. Are you so gaslit now that you're going to pretend you don't care? Have you been so successfully groomed that you're going to give him a free pass on this? All he has to do is answer questions. Why wouldn't he? 0345 6060 973. 6 times on a flight to New York, Boris Johnson was asked to explain or deny the detail in this story. My question to Boris Johnson fans right now is this. Why do you think he didn't? 0345 6060 973. We'll take a break now and I'll have to come up with a different topic to discuss between now and 1 o'clock because I can't imagine anyone will ring in to say I'm a Boris Johnson fan and I don't think he should answer any of these questions because ... Because eventually, you see, just barking blue passports and fish doesn't work anymore. You're just left with the carcass of what used to be your moral compass. You're just left staring at what these men have done to you. The Prime Minister is facing calls to come clean about his relationship with a woman whose flat he reportedly visited while she was receiving public money when he was Mayor of London and going on trips for which she had been rejected, but which he then personally intervened to reverse. So if you don't care about public money and you don't care about personal morality, what do you care about? Well, it is, I think, and I preface all of this with the acknowledgement that maybe I've been deranged by the current political mess as much as the people I accuse of having become deranged. But I think that if Tony Blair or David Cameron or even Gordon Brown, and as we stretch the bounds of credulity still further, I have to add Theresa May to this list, if they had stood accused of having a relationship, an undescribed but heavily hinted relationship, with somebody to whom they were not married and who was in receipt of public money over which they exercised some control, I think the world would have exploded yesterday morning when the Sunday Times ran that story. I don't know why it hasn't, but I do know that if I'm right, then the answer to that question will be because it's Boris Johnson. I don't want to be right. 23 after 12. Andrew's in Reading. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Well, first of all, James, I voted leave, but I really appreciate what you do and your show. I think believe greatly in a free press. And you call truth to lies, but I'm in an unfortunate position of still supporting Boris Johnson. And I feel like I'm sort of being cornered into this, really, by what's happened over the last 3 years. So
go on.
I really think I find it hard to disagree with anything you've sort of said. I just feel that we're in such an extraordinary situation. It's like an ugly contest. Yes. So you just have to go with who you think is the least ugly person. And I'm pretty sure I understand what you're saying, and I have oddly some sympathy for what you described. This sense of having been sort of slowly forced into this position. I don't know that there's an equivalent on the Remain side because you've made it Brexit related. I'm fairly confident that I wouldn't have any hesitation at all in condemning or calling out
somebody on the other side of the Brexit debate, even though they might be on the same side as me. So what?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I don't condone or his behaviour, and I would condemn it if it's proved to be right. But from my perspective,
we can condemn his failure to answer the questions already, can't we? But you're right. Well, if it's proved to be right,
I think if I were in Boris Johnson's position, let's face it, he's put himself in this position. I think if I was his PR advisor, I'd probably be advising him not to answer any questions.
He's Prime Minister. He's already shut down Parliament, and now he's going to stop talking to journalists on his own aeroplane to America. I mean, where does it end?
But, you know, I think where I've come to over the last 3 years, and it's a very sad position to be in.
I'm sure.
You know, when I tune into your programme, so much of what you say about what's happening is true.
Yeah, sorry
particularly the people who... I think one of the things, particularly the people who support Leave, only to make other people unhappy if that is the case. I mean, I'm
they
sure
say it is. They say it is. We don't know for sure. There's not a lot left, is there, apart from salty Remainer tears?
You know, it is. So getting back to your point, I mean, I'm at the point really where this is a battle. I mean, everything's gone out the window. This is finally, you know, the gloves are off. Hammond has come out from behind the shield of the Treasury. We know that we've got a speaker who, you know, is in all likelihood has a particular viewpoint which goes against all sorts of precedent. And I know you could say Boris Johnson proroguing Parliament has done that as well, but, you know, when it just seems like one bad act begets another bad act.
Well, is it really? So you're looking at this story and you're doing her emails. Forgive me for drawing a parallel. You're doing what the Trump supporters did with Hillary Clinton's emails.
Yeah.
You're saying, look, here's an absolute mountain that my fella's sitting on. Look at that molehill over there that the other lot have got.
You know, that's it's a very good point. You know,
I wish it wasn't.
So do I. I really do wish it wasn't. But you know, the reasons why I voted Leave are, you know, very important to me.
Okay.
And we're now left with no sort of reasonable options. You know, people on both sides say ludicrous things. I mean, it's ridiculous to say.
I sense a sort of you weren't someone whose reaction I predicted, because you sound as if you've been battered into submission. Not submission in the sense of changing your mind necessarily, but I just can't be bothered to strap my armour again on.
No, not at all.
So go on then.
Where I've got to is I think sadly, this is turned from some sort of reasoned debate between, you know, people. I mean, I know a lot of Remainers, and I think they have a lot of very good points for wanting to remain. And I obviously know a lot of Leavers who I think also have really good points. But, you know, that's all gone out the window.
And it's become a joke. Well, we'll have to rehearse the really good points that Leavers have at a later date. They may have had some, but I would have thought that reality had eroded most of them until all you are left with is, you don't like it. But I really admire your honesty. And I didn't mean, when I said battered into submission, I just meant that you sound beleaguered rather than battered. And if I didn't have to do this for a living, if I wasn't lucky enough, let's not kid ourselves, to do this for a living, I think I'd probably be fairly beleaguered as well. And there, I wonder if, unintentionally, Andrew's blown the whole story up for us, in that it really is nothing to do with Boris Johnson's conduct. It's nothing to do with what the Sunday Times reported. It is simply a story about Brexit. Except it isn't. Except it is. How do you feel about Boris Johnson? Well, I voted Leave, so I'm going to have to defend him. Or at least reluctantly acknowledge that he's my man. And I voted Remain, so I'm going to condemn him. I don't know when this happened. I really don't. I'm 90. I remember when Brendan Cox, I've told you this a million times, because, again, it was one of those real window-opening moments for me. When Joe Cox's widower was found to have behaved inappropriately in previous jobs, my Twitter blew up the night before I came on air. I think it was a Sunday night. And it was before I'd enacted my incredibly sophisticated blocking programmes. It was back in the days when you know, you didn't have to block on an industrial scale, and it was just weird. It took me a while to get my head around it. It was Brendan Cox turns out to, and I was, but what does that have to do with anything? What do you? And I suddenly realised it was all about Donald Trump. So this perception that somehow the widower of a man, I beg your pardon, the widower of a woman murdered by a white supremacist terrorist was on one, quote, side of the argument, and so was I. And Donald Trump and presumably people, presumably the white supremacist terrorist actually, was on the other side of the argument. And because you had been reduced to defending Donald Trump's moral depravity after the tape emerged of him confessing to a lifelong enthusiasm for sexually assaulting women, because you'd been reduced to defending that or calling it locker room talk, you somehow presumed that when Joe Cox's widower was found to have behaved unacceptably in a previous job, I would go on air and defend him. And I stared at these tweets, and I remember thinking, how have they done that to you? How have you ended up not only acknowledging your own moral corruption, but desperately reaching for the idea that everybody else is as morally corrupt as you are? Because I'll tell you something for nothing. Nobody could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and keep my vote. Nobody. I'll read this. It's from Jack. Although a lot of you have made this point, he writes, when Theo Usherwood unearthed the suspicious detail behind the Garden Bridge project, I thought that was going to be it for Johnson, but your show was the only coverage it got. I'm sure Theo won't mind me passing the credit on to Will Hurst and his team at the Architects Journal, who really led the field on that. There is no politician on earth who should be allowed to get away with these things, but somehow he does. Just sort of circling around the suggestion that this story about Boris Johnson's links to an ex-model who received public money from his office while he was Mayor of London, that this is his shooting someone on Fifth Avenue moment, and he is trying to style it out, even though it was Rupert Murdoch's Sunday Times that broke the story. I just wonder whether you agree with me that if you're a leaver of a certain type, you're going to have to turn off your moral compass, even though normally you'd be really outraged by this. Not so much the mysterious afternoon meetings, but the questions he needs to answer about public money. I think you're going to turn off your moral compass because of Brexit, and that's yet more evidence of how damaged the country is already before it's even flipping happened. 12:37 is the time. Gary is in Shepherd's Bush. Gary, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I've turned up my moral compass over Boris Johnson. You know, the Garden Bridge, you're talking about his indiscretions possibly.
Yeah.
I'll go as far as to say I'm a taxi driver. He was the one who allowed a certain minicab company to come into London, and basically they've got 100,000 people. I still will back him because of Brexit. He's the only politician that, besides Mr Farage, but he hasn't got the infrastructure to actually win an election, that he's the only politician that will deliver Brexit. Now, that is the most important thing for me over my finances, over my country. I want to put my country before my party or before my work. That's how strong I feel about...
By putting an adulterous liar in charge of it?
Absolutely.
How does that work, Gary?
It works because of...
Just in a nutshell, how do you think it is good for your country to put a proven liar in charge of it?
Because Brexit is the biggest thing for my country that I can think of.
What if he lied about that?
Lifetime. Pardon?
What if he lied about that?
That's an opinion, James.
No, it's a question, Gary.
No matter what he says or what he's done in the past, if he delivers Brexit for me, I'm happy.
Yeah, but what if he lied about Brexit?
I'm happy.
You're happy being lied to?
No, not really.
So what if he lied about Brexit? I mean, we already know that the figure on the side of the bus was a lie, don't we?
No, I don't think it was a lie.
Well, he's admitted it was.
No.
So either he lied to you when he told you, or he lied to you because it's down to 250 million down in his own press releases.
The bus made absolutely no difference to my way of voting.
I didn't say it did. I just pointed out he already lied. He already lied.
But the Remainers lied as well, so I'm sorry, it works both ways.
No, it doesn't, does it? Because if
the Remainers said we'll have 800,000 unemployed as soon as we vote,
and
it's all rubbish.
If whoever said that had questions, if whoever said that had questions to answer about the allocation of public money while in office, then I would be leading calls for them to be held to account. You're on national radio saying I don't care what he's done.
I don't, because
that's fine.
Brexit. No, so he's a leader of a political party that can deliver Brexit.
Yeah.
The Labour Party cannot deliver Brexit. It won't deliver Brexit. The party's completely been taken over by momentum that won't allow Brexit to happen.
Before you go, what is it you're most looking forward to about Brexit, Gary?
What I'm most looking forward to is basically the right to govern our own country.
And where do you think that right is most absent at the moment? What do you point out as the areas where we can't govern our own country? Bearing in mind Boris Johnson has shut down Parliament because it had too much power.
Yeah. I disagree with what I'm trying to say, James. I disagree with him on so many issues, and
but you agree with him that we have to leave the European Union to govern our country. Although I've never heard him say that in public with a straight face. So just point me towards the bits of our country that we can't currently govern.
Our own laws.
Which laws?
Any laws.
Yeah, name one.
Our freedom of information.
Freedom of information, you think, is because of the European Union?
No, it's not. It's also...
So what then? Why have they got different laws in Scotland from what we've got in England if they all come from Brussels, Gary?
James, the biggest thing is we're not debating over Brexit. My mind's made up. I'm never going to change. So...
it's all right. You don't have to change your mind. You just have to answer my question. If our laws come from Brussels, why are there different laws in Scotland from the ones in England?
Because on certain laws, they can make their own laws.
Right. So what laws can't we make?
We can't send a terrorist back because European courts of
European Court of Human Rights has nothing to do with the European Union, Gary. And which terrorist are you thinking of?
Abu Hamza.
He's gone.
Yeah. How long did it take to have him to be gone?
No, you just said he couldn't go. I just pointed out it had nothing to do with the European Union.
How many years was he in prison? And we were feeding him and clothing him and looking after him. And
that's why you want to leave the European Union?
No, that's one reason.
But except it's not, Gary. It's not a reason, because it's not true. He's not here. Yes, go on.
Right. The main reason I want to leave the European Union is that my father and my family fought in the war not to be taken over by a foreign power.
Yes, but we've just established that we haven't been taken over by a foreign power.
But we have, in my opinion.
And then I ask for some evidence, and you say something about Abu Hamza, mate. That's what Boris Johnson has done to you. That's what he's done to you.
You asked me a question of what you asked me that question.
Yeah.
I could give you other examples.
Go on,
where
go on then.
We don't control our own borders.
Yeah, go on then.
I just said it. We don't control our own borders.
Well, who does?
500 million people are entitled to come to this country.
500 million people are entitled to come to Germany or France or Belgium or Portugal or Spain, unless the government introduces its own right to insist that if you haven't got a job after 3 months or enough money to prove that you can support yourself independently, they can ask you to go back to your country of origin, Gary. But you knew that, right?
They can. But we've got 2 million illegal immigrants in this country anyway.
And what's that got to do with the European... How do you know they're illegal if we're not controlling our borders, Gary?
Because you know as well as I do they are.
Oh, mate. So just to be clear, what could he do? Could he shoot someone on Goldhawk Road and he'd still have your vote?
That's going a little bit too far.
Why? But you've already revealed that your moral compass is shot to pieces and that you're supporting you support a liar.
Because I don't support him at all.
Yes, you do.
I don't like him one little bit.
No, you do support him.
But he's the only politician
who can deliver the Brexit that you can't explain why you want.
Yeah, exactly.
You got me there. Respect, possibly not quite the right word, but gratitude certainly to Gary for doing what I didn't think many people would have the courage to do, which is to explain that they are prepared to overlook Boris Johnson's myriad transgressions because of their support for Brexit. I'm sorry that he couldn't explain his support for Brexit better, but don't please be vile to him, all right? Be vile to the people that turned him into that man. One of whom, Mr. Farage, he mentioned at the beginning of the show. Absolutely adamant that this thing has to be done. Can't give you a single reason why, except some that are actually false or untrue. And if Boris Johnson is the man that can deliver it, then I'm prepared to abandon all of my moral convictions, all of my beliefs, all of my subscriptions to standards in public life, because Brexit. 12:49 is the time, and as we mentioned earlier, how fantastic that the Labour Party are so cohesive and unified as they address this unprecedented chaos that's befallen the country since Boris Johnson. Just really thought things couldn't get any worse under Theresa May. Hold my pint, said Boris Johnson. John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, has been speaking at a conference in Brighton.
Should we start with more Brexit fudge? John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, urging Labour members this afternoon, whatever they think about Brexit, not to disobey leader Jeremy Corbyn.
Some people will know I've said that I'll campaign for Remain, but let me make it absolutely clear. I profoundly respect those who support a genuine alternative. And I agree we need to root through this that Jeremy is offering to ensure that we bring our party and country together again. In our debates today, I want us to demonstrate the respect we show each other and how we can bring our party together, and just how, as a result of that, we can also bring the country back together again.
John McDonnell, in effect, urging Labour members to vote with the National Executive Committee, that's the ruling body of Labour, this afternoon, which says that Labour shouldn't pass a motion saying that it should campaign to remain in the European Union in the event of a second referendum, but rather hold a special one-day conference after the tricky hurdle that would be a general election. John McDonnell, who of course has been a voice for Remain within the Shadow front bench in recent months, saying please to Labour members, vote with the National Executive Committee, don't vote with Unison, with Momentum's John Landsman, by voting for the motion which says that Labour should campaign for Remain in a second referendum. You look as if... Is that okay? It's okay. And then we're on to policies away from Brexit. Two big announcements. The first was that Labour will scrap the rollout of universal credit.
We'll roll out collective bargaining to enable workers to get their fair share of what they produce. And yes, we'll bring in a real living wage of at least £10 an hour. We'll end the barbaric rollout of universal credit. We'll cap rents, and we'll build 1 million new homes that our people need.
The question, of course, is will the policy pronouncements that might be positive or electorally attractive cut through the noise surrounding the infighting and inevitably, as we've just been reminded in the starkest of terms, the corruption that Brexit still inflicts upon the country's conversations?
What John McDonnell is trying to do is to provide a consumer-facing manifesto, in short, within this speech today. He talked about social care for the elderly being free at the point of use, with a new taxation system to pay for it. And then the big announcement, the cherry on top of the cake, was to reduce the working week to 32 hours, 4 days.
People in our country work some of the longest hours in Europe. And since the 1980s, the link between increasing productivity and expanded free time has been broken. It's time to put that right. So I can tell you today that the next Labour government will reduce the average full-time working week to 32 hours within the next decade. It will be a shorter working week with no loss of pay.
So if you're a small business and you're listening to this and you're employing somebody on, let's say, £500 a week for over a 5-day week, you're now going to employ them same pay, it's going to cost you £500, but they're going to do 4 days for you instead of 5 days for you.
Yes, although I think, and I'm a student of such matters, I think the traditional right-wing response to that would be, well, if to the employer who's complaining, you'd say, well, you have to work harder or get a better business. You can't. That's what you say to people who complain about not earning enough. You tell them to get a better job. So if you can say to businesses complaining that they have to pay their staff more, you could say, well, be a better business then.
So I think the left-wing argument would be that productivity in this country is low compared to rates across the rest of Europe.
Yes.
And if workers become more productive, then you can afford to pay them the same rate because they're doing the same amount of work in a shorter amount of time.
In a smaller amount of time. Which, well, you say left-wing. Didn't Kwasi Kwarteng and Priti Patel and others write a book that described productivity in this country as being the lowest on the planet, and British workers as among the idlest in the world?
You've beaten me there, James.
Well, it's my canary-like... No, not canary. What's a magpie-like memory? A canary, that's down a coal mine. I'm probably that as well.
You're the one you chirp first.
So 4-day week as a genuine manifesto pledge.
Genuine manifesto pledge.
I find that fascinating. Because, I mean, theoretically, everyone has to like it.
Yes.
But then, of course, once you start introducing these questions and you start examining it through the lens of media manipulation, you'll have people who own newspapers arguing that this is outrageous and disgusting, and people who would get a 4-day week believing it.
That could happen.
That will happen. Anything else?
No, that was the main. Those were the main points of the speech.
I got a bit confused then. I misread Harrogate as Ramsgate earlier. I just glanced at the screen and thought, flipping, hey, that's a bit of a fuss. I thought John McDonnell had finished his speech and then they'd all got up on the... But I glanced at the screen, I thought, it's only the Emmys. It wasn't the end of John McDonnell's speech at all. I just thought they're all a bit... forgive me, but I thought they're a bit glamorous for Labour, aren't they? Those people, what are they doing up? But for like, you know, they're in their fancy clothes for a nighttime event. It's all...
No, it's the Emmys.
Yeah, it was the Emmys. It wasn't the end of John McDonnell's speech.
That'll probably be a bit smoother than the
Labour Party conference. Holy moly!
So but the votes of this afternoon, and what John McDonnell was saying at the start of it was he hears the pain of Remainers within the party, but please don't vote against Jeremy because we need to get this through. We need to bring the party back together, and by voting against the National Executive Committee statement, just to delay the party having a position on whether to remain or leave in the second referendum, that would just cause more pain for the party. So come back, be loyal, and then there could be a special one-day conference after the general election.
Holy maloli. Theo Ashford, many thanks indeed. I'm sure we'll be hearing your dulcet tones more in the course of Sheila Fogarty's show and indeed the rest of the afternoon on LBC. Glancing at the clock, 12:56, which means I can give Christoph in Wembley Park about a minute. Christoph, Boris Johnson has successfully and perhaps permanently broken Britain's moral compass. Discuss.
Thank you, James. Well, you, a few weeks ago, introduced me to a great website, unheard.com. Which had the...
I did say you've got a minute, and I am interested to know what you think. Well, I'm going to have to wait for the film to find out more about your backstory.
Well, it's all about the ends justifying the means, isn't it, James?
Sorry, what is?
I think Boris Johnson sort of lying his way into power, if you like, proroguing Parliament, doing whatever it takes to achieve, what is good for his party, if you like.
I suppose.
And the reason I mentioned Unheard was, let me say first, my main point is, if the means that you use to achieve your cause are immoral or bad means, then no matter how noble your cause starts out being, I think it taints the cause. I mean, that is the main point.
But it's not. It's. Yeah, I mean, I do as well, obviously. But the things he stands accused of in his personal public money is different. But none of this was done. If all of the accusations and allegations against him in the Sunday Times yesterday are true, none of it was undertaken in order to deliver Brexit. So no one would argue that the ends justify the means in this context, unless I've misunderstood you, Christoph.
I think it's...
the lie on the side of the bus, the nonsense about borders, the Farage-flavoured lies about we can't control our money and all that nonsense, those...
I think it's when you start when means are employed to achieve your cause, even if you didn't...
No, but I'm not disagreeing with that, but none of the stuff under discussion today was done in order to achieve anything political, was it?
Not today, but look what Gary said. I mean, Gary said he was quite willing to turn off his moral compass or aim it in a different direction.
Yes, but again, that's not. It doesn't fit into the ends justifying the means model. I mean, it's a toxic proposal, and far be it from me to defend Boris Johnson, but Gary was talking about turning off his moral compass and acknowledging that it's wrong, but not caring because of Brexit. He wasn't saying if it helps deliver Brexit, then I'm in favour of it because the ends justify the means. It's more like I will forgive the messenger anything if he keeps whispering that sweet, seductive, brackets, completely dishonest, close brackets, message into my shell light. And with that happy image, I bid you farewell for another day.